I need to ask you a question before we start. If you ever known of a barn that had to be sealed shut, or animals that began to form perfect, silent circles, please leave a comment. I have to know if this is more widespread. What you're about to hear isn't in any archive. My name is Eli Vance. For the last 14 years, I've been the senior law officer of Red Pine County, Colorado. My predecessor served for 28. On his last day, he brought me into this very office and passed down procedures that exist outside of any manual, rules that travel from one keeper of the peace to the next, stretching back further than our records go. The most critical rule concerns livestock. If a rancher calls to report their animals producing noises that echo human speech, not normal cries, but twisted approximations, we don't investigate. We don't call a vet. We enact a disposal procedure. The entire property is put to the torch. Every structure, every animal. It's filed under biocontainment breach, a term so broad it invites no questions. He told me this action had been taken 5 times during his tenure. His own predecessor did it 7. It's rare, but it's relentless. A cycle repeating every 6 or 7 years, like clockwork. The community knows. They don't speak of it openly, but they understand. The same way you understand not to stare into a wild storm or question why certain paths through the deep woods are simply never taken after sundown. There's a knowing that lives in the bones of this place, a silent consensus written in shared glances and abrupt changes of subject when outsiders ask about the blackened, overgrown foundations dotting our remote valleys. In my 14 years, I've authorized procedure 3 times. The first was 8 years ago, a case that haunts the edges of my sleep even now. Old man McCready's dairy farm, up in the northern hollow. He called at 3 a.m, his voice a dry rasp over the line. He said his cows were chanting, not mooing, not bellowing, a constant, low, monotone drone that carried across the frosty fields, a sound he described as a prayer in a language that hurt the ears to hear. He said they stood facing the same direction, toward the old granite ridge, and their mouths moved in unison. I mobilized the team before dawn. When we arrived, the air itself felt heavy, charged. The cows were in their pasture, a line of black and white forms silhouetted against the gray morning, that terrible hum vibrating up through the soles of my boots. McCready was on his porch, rifle across his knees, not for us, but just staring at his life's work. He didn't protest. He just asked if we could make it quick. We doused the barn, the silos, the milking parlor. When the fire took hold, the chanting rose in pitch, becoming a screeching chorus before being swallowed by the roar of the flames. We compensated him from a discretionary fund listed as geological hazard mitigation. He moved to town, drank himself quiet, and died 2 winters later. The second event was 4 years back, with a goat herder named Lena Ruiz, out near the Sandstone Bluffs. Her report was different. No guttural chants. Her goats were humming, but it wasn't a peaceful sound. It was a dissonant, layered harmony, a sickeningly beautiful chord that was somehow mathematically perfect yet felt utterly corrosive. She played a recording over the phone. 10 seconds of it was enough to make my deputy, Leo, leave the room looking pale. She said the kids, the baby goats, were weaving in and out of herd's legs in complex patterns, never bumping, never stumbling, in time with the awful song. That sight was ash within 18 hours of her call. Lena took the compensation, bought a bakery in the city, and never looked back. This story isn't about those events. They were tragedies, but they were contained. They fit the pattern. This is about what happened last month, when the call came in again, and about what I discovered when we arrived on scene. The official record is closed, marked resolved, but some details don't belong on paper. They fester there. They raise questions that have no answers. They belong here in the spoken account, for whoever sits in this chair after I'm gone. So you understand not just the what, but the why, and the terrifying what comes next. The report landed on a chilly Tuesday in late October. The air had that sharp, metallic taste of coming snow. My radio operator, Sarah, who's been the calm voice in the chaos here for 22 years, patched the call straight to my desk. She didn't use the open channel. She used a direct line, and her phrasing was specific. "Sheriff, I have a code echo on line 2. Code echo. The phrase we coined, never written down." She knew. The rancher's voice, when I picked up, was the voice of a strong man trying to hold a dam together with his bare hands. Calm on the surface, but underneath it was the tremor, the cracking strain of someone describing the impossible to the only person they hoped might believe them. His name was Silas Greer. He ran a sheep operation on the high plains east of here. He said his sheep had started vocalizing. He struggled for the word. Not bleating, not calling, mimicking. It began 2 nights prior, he explained. A single ewe, one of his older ones, had begun making a sound like a rusty gate swinging on a windy night. But there was a melody to it, a repeating sequence of 3 creaking tones. By the next evening, a dozen had taken up, their calls overlapping, sometimes synchronizing for a few eerie seconds. His hired hand, a kid from the next county over, had collected his things that morning and left without a word, just a note saying he couldn't sleep. Silas's wife, Martha, had refused to go near the pasture after dark, saying the sounds weren't coming from the sheep's mouths, but from the ground beneath them. He called old Doc Evans, the county veterinarian. Evans had come out, examined 2 of the affected ewes with a clinical detachment that Silas said seemed forced. He'd taken temperatures, listened to hearts, looked into their eyes with a penlight. He found nothing. No fever, no irregularity, no sign of physical distress. Then he closed his bag, declined payment with a terse wave, and driven away faster than he'd arrived. That detail, the refusal of payment from a man who knew the value of $1 and the hardship of ranch life, told me everything. Doc Evans has seen bloat and foot rot and birthing complications that would turn a city person's stomach. He's seen hard things for 30 years. If he ran, it wasn't from sickness. He recognized a ghost he'd met before, a pattern in the chaos that his science couldn't name, but his instinct screamed at him to flee. I told Silas we'd be there at first light. I told him not to approach the animals, to keep his family in the house, and to call back if anything changed. The line went quiet for a moment before he simply said, "I understand," and hung up. The weight of those 2 words sat in the silent office. He didn't ask what we would do. He understood. I then called my deputy, Leo Gutierrez, who's been my right hand for a decade. He answered on the second ring, the sound of his kids playing in the background fading as he moved to a quiet room. "Leo," I said, "we have a code echo. Greer Place. First light." He didn't ask for details. He didn't question the order. There was only a beat of heavy silence. Then, "I'll prep the truck. See you at 4:30. Next, I called Officer Jenna Pulaski, newer to the department but sharp as a tack. She answered with a professional, "Sheriff?" I told her, "Jenna, I need you for a field operation tomorrow, dawn. Wear old clothes, work boots, things you don't mind destroying." Her curiosity was immediate. "Destroy? Sheriff, what kind of inspection?" I cut her off gently but firmly. "You'll see tomorrow. Get some rest." That night, sleep was a distant country. I sat at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and pulled the old, sealed files from the locked drawer in my mind. My predecessor's words about the rhythm echoed every 6 to 8 years. McCready's farm was 8 years ago. Lena Ruiz's was 4. We were due, in the most macabre sense of the word, but it was the locations that I mentally mapped. McCready's Northern Hollow, Ruiz's Sandstone Bluffs, now Silas's High Plains. They were scattered like random shots across a county map, yet they shared one stark, unifying trait: profound isolation. Each site was a world unto itself, miles from a nearest neighbor, nestled in terrain that discouraged casual observation. It wasn't about the type of livestock or the size of the operation. It was about the silence around it, the emptiness. It was as if whatever this was required privacy, a canvas of quiet upon which to paint its wrongness. We arrived at the Greer place as the sun was just a bloody smear along the razor edge of the eastern hills. The land was vast and flat there, the grass bleached blonde and whispering in a cold wind. The ranch house was a modest, weathered thing, and Silas was already waiting on the porch steps, not sitting, just standing like a sentinel. He looked hollowed out, as if the last 48 hours had burned away everything inside him but a brittle shell. A single, worn duffel bag sat at his feet. He didn't come to meet the truck. We walked to him. The air was so still our footsteps crunched like gunshots in the gravel. He looked from me to Leo to Jenna, his eyes lingering on the heavy-duty fuel cans we were unloading. He asked only one question, his voice flat. Why? I gave him the answer I was given, the only one I had. Because every single time, Silas, every time someone has tried to wait it out, or study it, or find another way, the situation's gotten worse. It spreads. It evolves. This procedure exists because it's the only thing that has ever worked. He absorbed this, his gaze drifting past us to his barn. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, not of agreement, but of resignation to a natural law, like accepting a flood or a drought. Martha's at her sister's, he said. He picked up the duffel bag. The entirety of his life he was choosing to take, walked his pickup truck, and drove away without a backward glance. He left his life behind in the rear-view mirror, trusting us to end it cleanly. Then we approached the barn. It was a long, low structure. Its red paint faded to a pale pink. From 50 yards away, we could hear it, a chorus of wrongness. It wasn't the benign bleating of sheep. It wasn't mechanical. It was something in the space between, a sound that seemed to vibrate in your teeth rather than just your ears. My deputy, Leo, stopped walking, his body going rigid. Jenna's face, curious and alert moments before, went pale as milk. I motioned for them to hold, and I moved closer alone. Each step amplified the sound. It resolved into individual threads. A wet, clicking gurgle here, a shuddering, fluttering note there, a rhythmic, grating scrape over there. They wove together, rising and falling with the cadence of conversation. But conversation where the words were made of broken glass and static. I reached the open barn door. The interior was shadowy, dust motes dancing in the slats of early light. The sheep were just standing there in their pens, not milling, not lying down. Dozens of them, still as statues. But from them came this fractured symphony. One animal, near the front, slowly turned its head toward me. Its eyes were the normal, blank, rectangular pupils of sheep, but they held no fear, no curiosity. It was like looking into a camera lens. Then it opened its mouth. Its jaw worked, not in a chewing motion, but in a deliberate, almost articulating manner. And out came a wavering, atonal series of notes that climbed, paused, and fell. It was a sentence's melody robbed of its consonants, a ghost of speech. It was almost something. Almost. And that almost was the most terrifying part. I stepped back, rejoining Leo and Jenna. Jenna was breathing shallowly. She looked at me, her professional composure cracking at the edges. What would happen, she asked, her voice tight, if we just quarantined it, studied it? Leo was the one who answered, his eyes never leaving the barn. He spoke of an incident from 18 years prior, before my time, when he was a rookie under my predecessor. A pig farmer named Hollis, over in the Cedar Breaks, had refused to burn. He was a stubborn man, proud. He'd argue it was just a strange infection, threatened lawsuits, said the sheriff had no right. My predecessor, bound by actual law, had been forced to back down. He documented the refusal and waited. For days later, Hollis's neighbor, a mile down the creek, called in a panic. His own hogs were making the same sounds. And worse, they were answering. A call would go up from Hollis's place, a series of guttural snorts that formed a pattern. A moment later, an identical, mirroring pattern would echo from the neighbor's pen, back and forth. A dialogue. By the time a team was assembled, it had jumped to a third property. In the end, Leo said, his voice hollow, 6 farms were put to the torch instead of 1. The delay, the attempt at reason, had cost 5 other families everything. We don't study it, Jenna, Leo finished, finally looking at her. We kill it. Fast. We set the accelerant with a grim, efficient silence. The sound from the barn seemed to weave around us, sometimes receding, sometimes swelling as if aware of our activity. Jenna worked methodically, following Leo's lead, but her hands trembled slightly as she poured the clear liquid. The smell of gasoline cut through the dry, cold air. I took the flare from the kit. As I approached the barn door for the last time, the cacophony inside shifted. The disparate clicks and gurgles began to synchronize, forming a louder, more cohesive, and deeply patterned chorus. It wasn't chaotic anymore. It was a performance, and we were the audience. The noises seemed to swell as I pulled the striker, the hiss-crack of the flare igniting a violent red punctuation in the dawn. For a second, everything went quiet. Then I threw it inside. The whoosh of ignition was a physical force. The silence that followed the fire's initial roar was profound, the deepest void of sound I've ever experienced, as if the flames had consumed not just the wood and wool, but the very frequency of the wrongness itself. We watched from a distance as the structure became a lantern of heat and light, then a collapsing skeleton of black timbers, and finally, a smoldering mound of ash on blackened earth. The report I filed later was 2 lines. Biocontainment procedure enacted at Greer parcel. Site sterilized. It was over, or so we thought. 3 days later, the crisp normality of a quiet autumn morning was shattered when my desk phone rang. It was Leo calling for his patrol car. His voice was low, urgent. Another one, Walter Finch. Ranch 12 miles west of the Greer place. Different report. My blood went cold. Different how? Leo paused. He says his cattle aren't making a sound. They're utterly silent, and they're standing in circles. Perfect circles in his south field. The interval was wrong. The pattern was broken. This wasn't 6 years later. It was 3 days. We went that night under a bone-white moon. Walter Finch was a man in his 60s, leathery and lean, and he met us at his property gate, refusing to drive further in. In the sweeping beams of his truck's headlights, we saw them. 40 head of black Angus cattle, motionless as if carved from obsidian, arranged in 3 flawless concentric circles in the middle of the pasture. They weren't sleeping. Their heads were up, eyes open, unblinking. They were positioned with such geometric precision, it looked like a crop circle formed of flesh and bone. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket smothering the usual night sounds of insects and wind. It was more unnerving than the noises at Silas's farm. We worked quickly. The cattle didn't move as we doused the outer perimeter of the formation with fuel. They didn't flinch, didn't sniff the air, didn't shift their weight. They were statues. When Leo threw the flare, they burned where they stood, a ring of fire that consumed them in perfect, silent formation. As the main barn caught, its interior blazing, I saw it. The support beams along the wall facing the pasture were covered in deep, swirling grooves, carved into the wood as if by a mad, obsessive hand. They hadn't been there the day before. Finch swore. We burned it all. The interval was shortening. The manifestations were escalating. First, the disturbing vocal mimicry. Then silent, intelligent organization. Now, physical marks left on the environment itself, as if whatever intelligence was at work was beginning to decorate, to claim. 48 hours of tense quiet followed. Then a third call. This one came from a horse ranch in the foothills. The owner, a woman named Anya, said her horses were standing in a vast, single-file spiral in her training corral, and the air above the center of the spiral shimmered. Like heat haze on a cold day, she insisted, her voice trembling. We found it just as she described. 20 horses, their coats slick with nervous sweat, trapped in a slow, silent walk along an invisible spiral path, and above the central point, the air warped and wobbled, a lens distortion with no source. The air within 10 feet of the spiral felt thick, pressurized, making my ears pop. We didn't hesitate. We burned the corral, the stables, the tack room. As the flames consumed the central post, the shimmer vanished with an almost audible snap, and the horses, finally breaking their trance, screamed and bolted into the night, lost. We had to list them as destroyed. That made 3 properties in 7 days. The historical pattern of isolated, years-apart events was shattered. This wasn't an incident. This was an outbreak, a chain reaction. Then the outside world noticed. A man from the State Department of Agriculture showed up at my office, suit too crisp for our dusty town. His name was Klain. He'd been auditing satellite imagery and thermal reports, he said, and had noted anomalous heat blooms in our county, our burns. He spread printouts on my desk. Your hazard classifications are insufficiently detailed, Sheriff Vance, he stated. You have no statutory authority to destroy private property on this scale without a formal state-declared emergency. Your biocontainment justification is a bureaucratic ghost. I am placing a hold on all further actions pending a full review. He ordered me to stand down, to investigate, document, and wait for approval, to treat a wildfire like a lab specimen. As he sat there, outlining procedural violations, my police radio buzzed on my hip. Dispatch, Sarah's voice tight. Sheriff, we have a 4th report. Code Echo. The old Vance family spread out near the Canyonlands. It was the largest ranch in the northwest sector. My own cousin's place. Klain heard it. He raised an eyebrow. Another one? How convenient. I ignored him, keen to my details, Sarah. Her reply sent a new kind of cold through me. The report isn't about sounds or patterns, Sheriff. He says there are more animals in his field than he owns. Shapes that look like his cattle, but move wrong. And he says they're talking to each other in words. I looked from the radio in my hand to Klain's smug, bureaucratic face. You heard, I said flatly. We have a 4th incident, the largest yet. I'm responding. He leaned back in his chair, a gesture of pure impotent authority. If you leave this office, if you initiate another unauthorized destruction of property, I will have your badge. I will file criminal charges. This ends now, Sheriff. We will handle this through proper channels. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly in the sudden quiet of the room. I took my hat from the rack, the worn leather familiar and heavy in my hand. File what you need to file, I said, meeting his gaze. But out there, right now, something is happening that your channels don't have a form for. I walked out, Leo falling in beside me. We drove in silence, the weight of insubordination and the looming, shapeless threat from the Canyonlands pressing down on the cab of the truck. The Vance Ranch was a 2-hour drive, the landscape growing more rugged and desolate with every mile. We arrived in the long twilight, the sky a bruised purple in the west. My cousin, Mark, wasn't at the house. He was waiting for us a half-mile down the access road, his truck pointed back toward town. He looked decades older than when I'd seen him at the county fair just months before. He didn't offer details. He just pointed a shaking finger toward the vast pasture that sprawled into the shadow of the mesas. "Out there," he whispered. "Just look." We left him and drove the final stretch in our vehicle, cresting a small rise that gave a view of the entire lower field. And in the fading light, we saw it, a geometric lattice. Hundreds of cattle were positioned not in circles or spirals, but in a vast, repeating hexagonal grid that stretched across acres, a living honeycomb of flesh and bone. The precision was staggering, inhuman, and moving among them, between the rigid points of the grid, were the shapes. Mark was right. They look almost like cattle, similar size, quadrupedal, but their proportions were subtly off. Legs too long in the wrong segments, heads that seemed to loll on necks that bent in extra joints. They moved not with the lumbering gait of steer, but with a liquid, gliding motion, flowing between the static, real animals like oil spreading across water. And then we heard the words. It wasn't the melodic mimicry of the sheep or the patterned clicks. This was a low, guttural, phonetically complex language. Syllables cracked and popped, vowels elongated into wet growls. It was a conversation, multiple streams of this alien speech overlapping, coming from the shapes as they navigated the grid. This was no longer a containment issue of a local anomaly. This was an incursion. Something was here using the livestock as anchors, as reference points, and it was building something communicating. We were not firefighters anymore. We were on a frontier, and we were losing. We didn't have enough fuel. We had come prepared for a standard burn, not for a siege of the scale. "We have to try," Leo said, his voice grim. "We did what we could. We used the truck to create a fire break along the pasture's western edge, the side closest to the open canyons, and began lighting the dry autumn grass. The plan was to create a wall of flame and hope the wind pushed it across the grid. As the first line of fire caught and began to race eastward, the reaction was instantaneous. The speaking stopped. The shapes stopped their gliding movements. Every one of them, and every real cow in that monstrous grid, turned its head in unison toward the approaching flames. Then they scattered. The real cattle finally broke, lowing in terror, stampeding in a chaotic, panic mass toward the uncut northern fence, breaking through it and disappearing into the dusk. But the shapes, they moved with purpose. Some of them did not flee from a fire. They ran directly into it, meeting the advancing wall of flame. There was no scream, just a brief, intense sizzle and a puff of black, acrid smoke that smelled of ozone and burnt hair. And they were gone. Others, however, flowed away from the fire with that terrifying liquid speed. They did not break through the fences. They seemed to slip through the barbed wire, their forms blurring and re-solidifying on the other side. Not all of them, maybe a dozen. They streamed away from the property, not toward the roads or the ranch house, but toward the broken, labyrinthine canyonlands that bordered the pasture, a wilderness of sandstone mazes, and deep ravines where a man could search for a lifetime and find nothing. We had contained the property. The Vance Ranch became an inferno that lit up the night sky for 50 miles. But we had not contained them. The fire was a spectacular public failure. The quiet protocol of whispers and sealed files was irrevocably over. Klain, who had followed us at a distance, saw the tail end of it from a ridge. He saw the scale of the blaze and the flickering hellish light. He claimed he saw the fleeing shapes, though he later wrote them off as panicked wildlife, distorted by smoke and flame. But the bureaucratic certainty was gone from his face when he met me in the ash-choked dawn. He spoke no more charges. He spoke of mandatory county-wide quarantines, of requesting federal epidemiological and hazardous materials teams, of potential evacuation zones. The language had shifted from violation reports to crisis management, but it was still the slow, grinding language of a system that operates on memos and meetings. I stood there, coated in soot, the heat of the failed frontier still radiating from the land, and knew it was too late for their committees. Something was out, in the canyons. The fire had sterilized the point of emergence, but the infection had already metastasized. I drove back to my office, not to face Klain, but to write, to add to the record that was never meant for the state. The rule exists for a reason. I wrote, burn the property, destroy it all. Do not hesitate. Do not study the anomaly. Curiosity is the gateway. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed with understanding. They can only be sealed with fire. Sometimes the fire isn't enough. Sometimes containment fails at the moment of execution. Sometimes things get out, and when they do, your role changes instantly and forever. You are no longer a containment officer, sterilizing a single infected site. You are a warden on a frontier that has just expanded beyond your map, and your duty shifts from eradication to perimeter defense. The protocol works only until the day it doesn't, and that day for Red Pine County was last month. The aftermath is a quiet, creeping dread. Klain state and federal experts arrive in a convoy of white vehicles. They scoured the burn sites with Geiger counters and soil samplers, took statements filled with halting, inadequate descriptions, and interviewed me for hours. Their reports, I'm sure, will speak of mass psychogenic events or unidentified zoonotic vectors and recommend further study. They have set up motion sensor cameras in the canyonlands, which have captured nothing but coyotes and wind-blown brush. They declare the situation stabilized. They do not feel, as I do, that the land itself is holding its breath. The ranchers know. Word is spread, not in newspapers, but in the hushed tones of the feed store and the long silences on party line phone calls. Everyone is watching their herds a little more closely, jumping at strange sounds of the night, interpreting the normal oddities of animal behavior through a new, dark lens. The old, accepted rhythm of the sacrifice, the one every 6 or 7 years that could be mourned and moved past, is broken. The pattern has become unpredictable, aggressive. My third and newest rule, the one I am figuring out in real time, is about vigilance in the aftermath. It's about listening to the land. Old man Higgins, who spread backs up the canyon walls, called last week to say his dogs won't go into the eastern pasture anymore. They stand at the fence line, hackles raised, growling at nothing. Do I burn his place? No, there's nothing concrete to burn. But I drove out and sat with him on his porch all night, rifles across our laps, watching that dark tree line. We saw nothing, heard nothing, but the dogs knew. I've started logging these reports. The uneasy livestock, the strange animal avoidances, the nocturnal lights seen deep in the canyons by hunters who now refuse to go back, in a separate, private ledger. I am mapping a new kind of topography, not hills and rivers, but of unease. Jenna, the officer who witnessed her first burn at the Greer farm, handed in her resignation yesterday. She said she couldn't carry the knowledge. She's moving to the city to work corporate security. Leo remains a pillar of grim solidarity, but the years of this, culminating in the sight of those shapes flowing into the canyon, have etched new lines deep into his face. He doesn't speak of retirement anymore. He speaks of needing more firepower, and he doesn't just mean bigger fuel tanks. The community's silent understanding has curdled into a low-grade, pervasive anxiety. The old social contract, we take care of our own strange problems in our own strange way, has been breached by the scale of this event. The state is here. The feds have been. The secret is a poorly kept whisper on the wind. And yet, the core truth remains unaltered. No outside agency, with all its protocols and probes, has any better answer than our cruel, simple fire. They just have more paperwork to file before they admit it. So, I sit in this office, the successor to a line of men who thought they had a handle on the horror, realizing I may be the last sheriff of the old way. The next one will inherit not just a procedure, but an active, unresolved Cold War with a patch of wilderness that has been colonized. I find myself returning to the physical evidence we failed to destroy because we never got close enough. The markings on Finch's barn. I took a photograph on my personal phone before the flames took it, a violation of every rule. I study it in the dead of night. The grooves weren't random. Up close, in the digital zoom, you can see they form interlocking patterns, a repeating sequence of arcs and angles that hurt the eyes to follow for too long. It looks like a language, or a schematic, or both. Was it a message, a beacon, or simply the psychic spillover of whatever consciousness was orchestrating the cattle grid? This is the danger of the new frontier, the desperate urge to understand the enemy, to find a weakness in the pattern. It's the same urge that makes you stare into the storm. I have to fight it. My job is no longer to comprehend, but to guard the perimeter, to watch the canyon's edge and decide, in the moment, how much fire is enough when the map no longer shows the borders of the infection. The final, bitter lesson is this. We operated for generations under the comforting illusion that the anomaly was a thing that appeared in specific, isolated places. We now know it is perhaps a presence that occupies a territory, and it only manifests visibly in those places when it is building or feeding or experimenting. The ranches weren't the disease. They were the symptoms appearing on the skin of a vast, infected body of land. We have been treating skin lesions while the infection saturates the bone. This record, then, is my final testament to the old rule and my first, faltering field manual for the new one. Burn what you can see. Guard against what you cannot. And know that the silence from a canyon is not absence. It is patience. The protocol was our
If
wall.
this story is resonating
The frontier
with you,
is now our
if
home.
it
It has clicked into place like a final, dreadful piece of a puzzle you didn't know you were solving, then I need you to act. This isn't just a tale. It's a transmission. A warning shot fired across the bow of a world that prefers its mysteries neatly filed away. The reason you feel that chill, that recognition in your gut, is because stories like this, the fossilized remains of real truths. They're the echoes of rules written in ash and blood, passed down not for entertainment, but for survival. I am telling you this because the old ways of keeping quiet, of handling things locally in the dark, are collapsing. The silence has been broken, and now the knowledge needs to spread faster than the phenomenon itself. So here's what you must do. First, acknowledge the signal. Hit the like button right now. That simple action is a flag planted in the digital soil. It tells the algorithm that this matters, that there are people who need to hear these accounts. It pushes this record higher, making it visible to the next person lying awake at night, wrestling with the memory of a strange sound from a neighbor's field or a local legend they always dismissed. Your like is a baton pass. Second, you must subscribe to Winds of Thought. This channel is not a hub for fiction. It is a clearinghouse for testimonies, for connecting disparate dots across different landscapes. By subscribing, you are joining a watchtower network. You are ensuring you hear the next account, the next piece of the pattern, whether it comes from another county, another state, or another country entirely. We are stronger linked by this signal than we are isolated by our fear. Third, and most critically, you need to look at your own world with new eyes. Listen to the old stories in your area, the ones about the cursed hollow, the field that won't grow anything, the animals that acted funny before the storm. There is data in that folklore. Then come to the comments. This is the most important step. Tell me what you know. Have you ever heard a similar rule? A story of a barn burned for no reason anyone would explain? A pattern of livestock behaving in geometrically perfect, silent ways? Did a grandparent ever warn you about a specific place, a specific time of year, with a fear that seemed outsized for the warning? Your comment is not just a piece of trivia. It is a data point. It could be the clue that reveals the true scale, the true pattern of what we are facing. Your local legend could be the key that connects to mine, and together, we might finally see the full shape of the thing in the dark. We have to know how far this reaches. The protocol of isolation has failed. Our only protocol now is connection. So subscribe and speak. Your comment could be the key.